Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby?
Here.
Mr. Helmer? Here. Mr. Kurth? Ms. Manley? Here. Ms. Schultz? Here. Ms. Unger? Here. Ms. Wondercheck?
And Mr. Kurth did let us know that he was not able to make it tonight. In recognition of the serious and important nature of our efforts here, we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now for those who wish to prepare for the meeting, we will have a moment of silence. This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday by posting the agenda at each district school, the district office, and the city library. The agenda was also posted on the district website. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Journal Sentinel, the Waukesha Freeman, and the Waukesha Now, all of which have filed requests for all public notices. The first item on our agenda is privilege of the floor. So this portion of the meeting is an opportunity for you to come and voice your concerns to the board. So please do not be offended when we quietly listen. We may take notes, and we do not immediately respond to your questions and comments. This is the time for you to talk and for us to listen. Thank you for coming to voice your comments and concerns. When I call your name, please step up to the microphone, address the chair, and state your name and address. Each presentation is to be restricted to a maximum of 3 minutes. Privilege of the floor will be limited to half an hour. Presentations are not to be designed for purposes of engaging others in debate in this forum. Discussion of certified, classified, or professional personnel or of individual Board of Education members shall not be considered an appropriate topic for this forum, and the speaker will be ruled out of order. I do want to say also that we will have public Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. We'll be limiting to that to 30 minutes, so if you have questions after the presentation, you'll have some time to do that as well. The first person I have is Elaine Gearhart.
First meeting. Elaine Gearhart, 13705 West Maria Drive. This is my first meeting. We've been in New Berlin for a little over a year. We moved here last summer from another not so organized district. I'm actually very impressed with how this district is run. When I learned in October, November last year that you guys were having issues with your budgets and considering consolidating the schools, I was really taken back and frustrated by it. I think what you have now is a model for 7th and 8th grade being in a middle school setting and kind of a side introduction to high school is a great setup. There's so much research out there saying that 6th graders in elementary school setting do way better than in a middle school setting. The proposal of a 5th grade in a middle school setting is just beyond me. I have a 4th grader right now at Elmwood Elementary. Him going to middle school next year just blows me away. I really hope you guys are considering the students and not just the dollar signs when it comes to making your decisions. I guess that's my biggest point in the matter. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to be first. That's my biggest point right here, so I'll let someone else take the floor that has a little more time to be organized with their thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, you did great. Next is Jenna Brown.
Hi, I moved to New Berlin recently within the last 2 years. The one and only reason I moved was because I disliked the school district that my children were in, and I wanted to give them the best opportunity for a good education. I bought the same size house as I owned in another district, very close by, for $100,000 more in New Berlin than I would have paid where I moved from. I also sold my house at a loss just to get out of that school district. And the deciding factor in the house that we bought had to do with its proximity to the elementary school and the high school. If we end up consolidating the high schools, we're gonna have an extra 20-minute drive versus a 3-minute drive now. And all the money that we've invested, that's one thing. The other thing people need to realize is your property values are tied to the strength of the school district that your home is in. So if you're gonna nickel and dime over $100 or $200 a year and be willing to lose tens of thousands of dollars in property value over the long run, then I would say that's very short-sighted.
Thank you. Next, we have Karen Klein.
I'm Karen Klein. My address is 13935 Elizabeth Court. I have 2 children in this school district. One of the reasons why we moved here is because of the strength of this school district. I have 2 children, one that is in 6th grade and one that is a freshman in high school. We consolidate schools, and both of my children will have completely longer commutes to school, which will cut into every other opportunity they have for outside recreation or any other time with their family. Not only that, but by consolidating the schools, you're limiting the opportunities for all of the children throughout the district. You will be consolidating not only sports activities, but academic opportunities to drama and arts. You'll be consolidating all of that down to limit our children's availability to those programs. You're taking the fine arts even as the example. You have a play here at the high school, you have a middle school play, you have 2 per district. That allows twice as many children to have those opportunities to gain that experience in all those roles. Same thing with band, same thing with sports, same thing with your academic decathlon, with your math teams, with all of those opportunities. You're limiting the ranking system for the children. And all of those extracurricular things that will produce well-rounded children and be able to make it into colleges, they will lose those opportunities and have it more limited. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Jerome.
Hi, I'm Karen Jerome, 5310 South Nicolay Drive. I basically looked through this quickly, and it looks to me more of a number crunching game versus really looking at New Berlin, Eisenhower being a number 5 ranked school in the state, and New Berlin West being ranked 15 or 16. I mean, if we want to keep it there, do we really want to look at these 2 options? I mean, again, we're not focusing on the kids and their education. Elementary school is a building block. It gets the kids ready and excited for as far as school goes. They want to go. If they're going to be in these overcrowded classrooms, I'm guessing they're not going to have the teachers associated with it either. You're going to have kids that are gifted or kids that have special needs. They're going to be falling to the wayside. So what are you going to do there? Again, we need the class sizes where they are. They're feasible, and that's what the kids need. As far as the consolidation of the high schools, there's been many studies out there that show that extracurriculars help with self-esteem. They give the students a way to be a part of another family. You know, we've got 2 bands in the high schools. They do very well. My kids participate in ACDEC, and I've had 2 kids graduate from New Berlin Eisenhower, and 3 are still there. The academic decathlon at Eisenhower is top notch, as well as New Berlin West, they make it to state every single year. So now you're taking an education like academic decathlon, and you're only allowing half the students into it as there are now. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? As well as even football, both teams are great. And now we're gonna give the opportunity to only half of the kids? Why? We need to come up with a better way to crunch the numbers, keep Orchard Lane open, keep our district the way it is, because that is what is best for New Berlin, the city of New Berlin, as well as the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Ray Schaefert?
Hi, Ray Schaffert, 15890 West Allison Drive here in New Berlin. Well, it's a minor miracle I made it here tonight, actually, along with a lot of these people. For starters, I, like a lot of people in here, wasn't aware of this meeting until recently. It's not even on the city's Facebook page, or worse, the school district page either, even as of today. Also, this meeting is being held on a Wednesday night instead of a Monday, like most board meetings. It's not just any Wednesday night. It's the second night of the school year when parents have many other things on their mind other than a hastily scheduled board meeting. All of that aside, I thought this meeting would be run-of-the-mill, nothing out of the ordinary. Surely they wouldn't try to quickly shoehorn a meeting into the schedule to tackle an issue as critical to the community and hotly debated as school consolidation, not without promoting it, right? If so, you'd think informing 2,000 citizens who follow the district via Facebook would be one place to start. Or better yet, sending an email to all the parents in the school district. After all, they're the ones most affected by talk of the closures and consolidation. They are the ones who have been attending meetings, completing surveys, knocking door to door to save the schools from closing for the past 18 months. To keep them out of the loop at this point would be rather insulting, and yet none of those things happened. The meeting presentation wasn't even made public, at least as of 4 o'clock when I last checked, for people to look at to come with prepared questions. It's almost as if some people went out of their way to discourage attendance and talk as little about this meeting as possible. Why is that? Which brings me to the topic of tonight's meeting, school consolidation. Apparently, we're going to hear a presentation tonight from a consultant about closing our schools. Since nobody saw a copy prior tonight, I'd like to know who requested this study, the board, the school superintendent's office. Why was this particular consultant chosen? It hasn't been discussed in any public meetings. Hopefully we get to hear more about this tonight, or at least in the Q&A period. But the lack of transparency and trust that we've seen over the last year is what makes me skeptical. As for the topic of the public portion of the meeting, it's stated in the agenda, quote, consultant's presentation regarding validation of School District of New Berlin school consolidation options. Some immediate concerns are raised in the presentation title alone. We haven't publicly decided to close 3 schools. Have certain leaders already made up their minds? For example, the presentation could be called Reviewing New Berlin School System's Fiscal Responsibility and Long-Term Outlook. The current title gives off the impression that whoever commissioned this study is looking to find a reason or a rationale to have information to hide behind to defend their decision to close the schools. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. I'm completely against closing our schools and even more strongly against consolidation. My family and I moved here 10 years ago specifically to not be a part of a 2,000+ student campus. My family and I sought out the high schools. If you consolidate schools, there will be many private presentations being given parent to parent titled Parents Presentation Regarding Validation to Relocate to Another Community. Despite all of this, I remain optimistic about the school district's future, but my optimism is about to run out. Since the spring of 18, it's been nothing but unanswered questions and delay and delay and delay. Finally getting to a point where delays last long enough to force a referendum vote, which failed as predicted by many. The lack of preparation time caused by those delays I mentioned helped ensure that it did not pass. I can't speak to the rationale prior and board members and the administrators had, and we can't live in the past. But we should demand present and future leaders act fiscally responsible and transparent, something that, unfortunately, still seems lacking. I hope this can get turned around without closing and consolidating schools, and I hope tonight's presentation sheds light on some unknown options to save or find money. Nobody here wants to be faced with an either-or scenario next spring, which would be pass a referendum or schools close. As a parent, I'm begging you to do whatever you can and in a transparent fashion to keep this from happening. Thank you.
Ann Shaflinsky.
Fire and brimstone there. Ann Shaflinsky, 5860 Foxhaven Court. So I had a chance to do a tiny bit of speed reading like some of the rest of the people in the crowd, so I have a little idea of what the consultant is about to tell us. I noted that there's still much work to do. There's analysis of the true capacity of our schools. There's the costs of closing 3 schools and relocating to over 2,000 students. There's a lot of work to still be done, clearly from what I could tell in my speed reading. So we'll find out more, I hope. But the fact that we're still actively discussing the closing, and I'm not calling it consolidation because that gives it a nice little fiscal ring to it, doesn't it? The closing of 3 of our highest performing schools in the state as a knee-jerk reaction to a short-term revenue problem that we've known was coming for years gives me pause and has already prompted families to lose faith in your leadership and flee the district at the mere prospect of this happening. And I'm not being dramatic about that. Many of us in the room can name people that have already done just that. So many of us come here, and maybe you will watch at home, hoping that you will come to see that such an irreversible decision would be fiscally irresponsible. Contrary to what your constituents told you they wanted in the community survey that you yourselves commissioned and relied upon for other decisions. I agree with the woman who said it looks like a number crunching exercise. It is so much more than that. I've talked to you at this microphone before about the hard costs and the soft costs, and the consultant study perhaps addresses a few of the soft costs, but not nearly all of them. The cost to closing 3 of our 8 excellent schools would be staggering. To the students whose learning is disrupted and environments are disrupted, when almost half of them suddenly have to travel to an entirely different school farther from home, and their families, and all of the things that the other woman mentioned about the disruption to that and how far they'd have to go, how much time they would lose just sitting on the buses, heaven's sakes. Disruptive to our staff, who have to find their way through their own upheaval and create a new normal for our students in all of those environments. But more long-term, for our community who has then lost complete faith in your leadership and leave, or stay, and watch falling ACT scores and falling property values. It would tear this community apart. I think most of us would agree upon that. So we need you, and we expect you to do everything possible to avoid such an extreme and desperate measure, and instead look to fill a small amount of excess capacity that you have been talking about, increase revenues, or cut some other costs. We need you more than ever to take a long-term view for the futures of all of our students and for this community. Thank you.
Charlotte Krupa.
Good evening, board. I moved to New Berlin in 2000. I've been out here for 19 years, and I prepared a statement, and I'm hoping that you can find it in your hearts to listen to me. School consolidation can do 2 things. It can fix a budget, or it can destroy a sense of community. And I believe that this is where we would be headed if we do the consolidations that are part of this packet of information. For me, the community and our students is the most important, because the school budget can be fixed with other measures that may not have presented themselves yet, or the school board and school staffs do not want to consider them as solutions because they're a little bit too difficult to understand. The quality of education is most important. As a parent of a recent high school graduate and a 10th grade student here at West, my thought is, do we really need more class choices to be offered? Colleges only accept credits from AP courses with 3 or above. They do like rigor in a student transcript, and that is where the AP classes can play a critical role. As a parent, and maybe the majority of high school parents will agree, whose students are going to go on to college, want our students to be challenged, and we want to see the payoff when they go to college. Taking AP courses and getting good test results helps with the cost of college and can cut down on the time the student actually attends college. Currently, the curriculums at both high schools offer way too many classes where there is minimal student attendance, and maybe these offerings could be cut instead of increased. We need to reorganize the curriculum to offer students what they really need to succeed, AP course choices, and trade classes if the students will not be attending college after high school graduation. And maybe these are where the unforeseen costs can be trimmed instead of consolidating our schools. Money. Everyone wants to know how to save money. Where is the money going to come from? Closing an elementary school is not the answer because more staff will be needed in the schools where these students are placed because those classes are going to get larger. And then we will have not really solved the issue of saving money by closing the school because more staff is going to be needed in other places. New properties are being built in our New Berlin community, adding new families, and these new families either have children or will be having children soon. I mean, that's the biggest opportunity here in New Berlin is that we are a growing community. There's going to be influxes of more dollars into our community because people are building. So there's a little bit more of an unforeseen addition into the budget, right? Our school community, New Berlin is a nice community. It is a city with a country feeling. Closing any school or merging any schools and moving students around will destroy any sense of belonging to a school community that we currently have. Our New Berlin residents enjoy our cultural differences, and we do have those, and our cross-city rivalries in our high schools. We enjoy going to the football games. We enjoy going to the soccer games. Those are the biggest attended events here in the city. Our high schools currently rank in the top 20 of all high schools in the state of Wisconsin. Number 5 for Eisenhower, number 16 for New Berlin West. They have outstanding graduation rates, 98% and 97% respectively. I am so proud of both of these schools. And the students that have those high graduation rates started at the elementary level. They grew up in New Berlin. We love our schools. Do not destroy them by consolidating them. I know that combining these schools will undoubtedly bring down these numbers. Only so many students will be able to be active in their chosen sports, clubs, and activities, diminishing the morale of the students themselves, and then the academics will begin to take the downward turn. We don't want to see that happen in our community. We love the way our children grow up. Then what should we do? How do we save that money if that is really what this is all about? I wait to see what those answers really are. All I really know is combining our two high schools is not the correct course for New Berlin, nor is closing an elementary school that is really needed in our community. Instead of trying to save money, it will create less opportunities for our academically solid students. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Yench.
Scott Yench, 6005 South Carrington Lane. Probably no surprise what I'm going to tell you tonight, because I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight, because this was a hastily prepared meeting, and then it was a hastily changed meeting. And it does give off the impression that somebody's trying to hide something. And I don't think that's the impression you want, and I don't think that was your intent, but that's how it's coming off. And we should be better than that. So I hope that you take the comments that were said before and the reaction to those comments as a clear message about what message you just sent to the community as a result of how this meeting was handled. That said, here we go. We seem to be in a situation of contradictions. We're dealing with low enrollment, but the board appears to be slow walking open enrollment. We made major investments in Ike recently, the parking lot, the pool, et cetera, et cetera. And yet closing Ike High School would render these investments essentially unnecessary and foolish. The district brags about its rankings. We see it all the time. You know, we see it in the Facebook posts, we see it in all the publications and things like that. Oh, niche.com ranked us as this, so US World News and World Reports ranked us as this. And yet, we're talking about jeopardizing those rankings by impacting the entire fabric of what created them. What sense is that? The district emphasizes academic and career planning all the way down into the middle school grades. But separating the middle schools and the high schools will negatively impact that program. Advanced classes will be impacted. How will middle school students take high school level courses? What will that look like? Are you going to move students? Are you going to move teachers? Are you going to double up on teachers? What about the high school students that are mentoring those students? Does that go away? Do you move the students? How does that happen? The questions, I was talking with somebody about this a couple of days ago. Every time I think about this topic, the number of questions multiply. I don't know what's going to be said tonight because I got to see this when everybody else did, which was just a few minutes ago. I have no idea what he's going to say. I don't know what this report is about. I do know that the person that's sitting behind me was the superintendent of the Elmbrook School District when they closed Hillside Elementary. It was a very contentious issue at the time, and now the headlines are they're planning on reopening Hillside Elementary. $8.4 million to reopen that school. And in the meantime, they've torn apart the fabric of those communities, of all the schools that were affected. And now they're going to tear it apart again and redistrict and change a bunch of things. So is that what we're going to do here in New Berlin? We're going to tear things apart, especially with Orchard Lane, because you've said that you're going to reopen it. So now you take time and money and investment to build a community into all the schools that these kids go to, and then you say, never mind, why don't you go back to Orchard Lane? And by the way, we haven't been maintaining it all that well. The roof leaks a little bit, but don't worry, we'll get to it. Where's the sense in that? Where's the long-term vision? I'm seeing short-term vision right now. I'm not seeing long-term vision. The long-term vision of this board got us to where we are now, or I should say the lack thereof. And this electorate spoke when they didn't elect one of those people back on this board that you're sitting on right now. You need to listen to that, please. You came so very close this spring to passing that referendum with an incredibly, impossibly short time frame. You had 70 days, and you came so close. But for the lack of communication and what I would consider ill-considered messaging, it would have passed. And no, it wouldn't have fixed all of our problems, but it would have fixed the critical problems that are causing this discussion to take place right now. You're back to holding a gun to people's heads. And that's what's causing the reaction that you're getting right now. And sooner or later, it is going to backfire and you are going to run into problems. Either people are going to be tired or they are going to be frustrated and they are just going to give up. They're going to quit and they're going to leave. It took me 20 minutes and no traffic to get here tonight. And I come here at almost every meeting I can, and it takes me the same amount of time. I can imagine that time might double in the mornings and the afternoons. For people who have to get here in order to pick up kids, drop off kids, for the kids themselves to get here. The questions astound me because every time I think about it, I think of more. And I really hope that you guys are doing the same. Please don't give up on this district. So far, these people haven't given up on you. But if you do something as stupid and short-sighted as this, I'll be one of the people organizing the people that need to find open enrollment schools that are closer than this school is to a large amount of this population. And I won't want to do it, but I will. Thank you.
All right, we are hitting the 30-minute mark, but we just have 2 more left. So I just asked these last 2, keep it to 3 minutes, please. So we have Bill Adams, who's next.
Bill Adams, Weatherstone Boulevard, New Berlin. I wasn't planning to speak this evening because you all know where I stand. And I think it's pretty obvious that everyone else is standing in the same place. You will not be able to close Orchard Lane. You will not be able to consolidate because you have virtually 0 community support. And without that community support, any such action is doomed to fail. The amount of money we're talking about is 3 or 4% of the budget, and we can take care of that by far less drastic measures. But I'm not here to speak for myself this evening. I'm here to speak for Tilly Gillard. She's the last person that I met before I came here this evening. I take pictures for Swim and Dive. Tilly is on the team. The picture I took, 3 pictures I took of her. The first, she was standing with her arm like this, waving. And on the other end of the pool was every member of that swim team. The second picture was her doing a perfect dive into the pool. Magic. And the third was her stroke, where she did a very nice freestyle. She finished last in the event, but she finished first in everyone's heart at that meet. I wrote to their parents and said I had some pictures, and they wrote back to me. Now, as you probably know, many of you, she's a special needs child. She's an absolutely marvelous human being. And so the question is, how does she fit into this equation? But this is what their parents said, so I'm speaking for them tonight. Oops, I lost it. Well, I guess I can't. I had it on my cell phone. But the basic point is this. She participates in she's a senior. She's in the Honor Society. She's on the honor roll. She waves the flags at the football games. She participates in the plays that they have. She's on the swim team, and she has been totally embraced by every person in the school district. Her parents are exceptionally proud of her. You meet her, and you see why. She's the canary in the coal mine. She's the one you have to focus on. And when you do that, you'll realize that what you are contemplating simply should not happen, cannot happen, and the community will not allow it to happen. So get this off the table.
And last but not least is Scott Klass.
Scott Klaus, 5685 South Andre Drive. I did not have a chance to prepare anything because I too found out about this from an email at 6:11 today and replied at 6:13, what time does it start? Because it wasn't on the Facebook page. So I'm just gonna speak from the heart. And I have a unique perspective here. I was an ex-teacher. I am a business owner who I am a business owner that my business is very greatly affected by the school district in real estate. I used to be a coach here, and I'm a parent. So as a business owner, I think of this as an analogy of a publicly traded business. In the business world, you do not need to be profitable in order to be valued like billions and trillions of dollars right now. It's a very unique world. I think of Zillow or Facebook And these publicly traded businesses have board members and they have shareholders. The shareholder's job is to protect the value of the asset, and it's very similar, I think, in a public school district. As community members, we are all shareholders in the investment that the school district has, and the number one reason of that, or thing of that, is our houses. And to me, it makes perfect business sense to invest a little bit of money to protect the biggest investment that most everybody here has. So then as a coach, I think of all the opportunities that I myself had growing up. I wouldn't have gotten into college if it wasn't for sports, and I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't have learned the lessons that I would have learned. And I just think that if you take that away, there's going to be a lot of kids at West that aren't going to have any opportunity for sports because the Eisenhower kids are going to take all those opportunities from them. I used to coach at Ike, so. As a parent, it's obvious. A lot of those were expressed already. I too live 20 minutes away, and I can't think of how long a bus ride would be, how much extra time that would take from my kid, that right now the world of a kid, and I don't know it quite yet because she's in first grade, but the world of a kid in middle school and high school is lifting, it's sports, it's drama, it's school, it's homework, and it's literally wake up and repeat. It might be 5:30 to 9:30, and now you're taking 20, 30, 40, 50 extra minutes just riding a bus. I can't imagine what that would do, and the thought of it it makes me sick. And then as a teacher, you know, there's a lot of this around the teachers and the educators and the principals, and a lot of them are in the back, and I just think, you know, could we look at them in the eye and say, I'm sorry, but you are not worth $89, as an example from what this referendum was. And at first, I guess I'm naive because I did not think there was any way imaginable that this would not pass. And so I'm a very involved community member, and I wasn't as involved as I probably would have been knowing that it wouldn't have passed. I thought it was a no-brainer. And the solution that I think we've made a lot of good progress in the budget, but if we have a more consistent message, a longer thought-out message that can answer a lot of the frequently asked questions and objections that there were, I believe that would pass. I believe if you can get it to the exact dollar or penny, exactly what we're going to spend, exactly what it's for, exactly what it is, there will be a lot of objections that will go away, and we would see that succeed. So I just pray and hope that the community I love does not do something as drastic as consolidate.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to our regular agenda. The first item, or actually the only item, is the presentation. Did you want to tee it up?
Sure. So as you may or may not be aware, certainly some of the comments that were made have talked about the ongoing process about our budget. And certainly this is something that we talk about annually. I started here about 9 years ago, and certainly we did foresee budget issues, and it's a circular situation. Sometimes you have legislation that passes that's unexpected, that all of a sudden you've got dollars that are freed up that aren't expected. For example, Act 10 back in 2011, our backs were up against the wall back then. That was my first year as superintendent, and legislation changed, and we were able to save dollars in health insurance, for example, that we originally didn't anticipate, to the tune of several $1 million annually. And then we have certain situations where you've got facilities issues. We commissioned a report back in 2011 for the first time, and we put together a long-range facilities plan. My point being, leading up to the last couple years, this has been an ongoing conversation, whether it's referendum whether it's open enrollment, and just so you know that it will be on Monday's agenda for the board to discuss how they want to move forward with open enrollment. Also updating our enrollment projections. Certainly we did see a decline in our enrollment projections have been quite accurate. And so, a lot of our dollars are factored in by the enrollment that we have in our school district. The topic of referendum is something that we will be bringing forth back to the board on what would the board want to do as it relates to referendum. Also, staffing reductions. I'd be remiss to mention that for the last 2 years now, we've made significant reductions in our staffing. And while we are trying to shield the classroom as much that we can and shield our programs, certainly it's starting to have an impact. And then also the consideration of refinancing our debt is another topic of conversation that the board will enter in. This is just one of those various topics that the board has discussed and will continue to discuss. Our expectation is that the board will not make any decision tonight. Again, this is part of a process. Tonight is not an event. It's part of an ongoing process. And so, certainly based on the conversation that will be had, presentation by Dr. Gibson is available to come back for the next school board meeting to address either further questions or further clarification from the board and or from the community. Further, Dr. Gibson will be presenting to the task force that was commissioned by the board in a couple weeks. Dr. Gibson will be heading to China for a while and will be returning, and we'll be able to speak directly to that task force as well so that they are informed about this option along with the other options too. So again, there are a lot of moving parts. This happens to just be one of them. And again, we do not certainly take this lightly whatsoever. And again, it's part of this process. And so without further ado, I guess I will mention specifically, and Dr. Gibson will clarify this, on April 29th, again, part of our ongoing process, the administration presented to the board what consolidation could look like. There were 2 different options that we brought forth to the board for the board to consider. One option was to consolidate only the elementary schools. So going from 4 elementary schools to 3. The second option that we brought forth to the school board was that of basically an entire district consolidation, which would take us from 4 elementary schools to 3, to 1 middle school, and then to 1 high school. As a result of our presentation to the board, we were asked to bring forth somebody to validate and do a due diligence on the numbers that we presented to them on April 29th. And so with that, that's why we have Dr. Gibson here to essentially validate the numbers that were brought to the board on April 29th. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Gibson for his presentation.
Thank you. I'm just looking at 7:20 here so I can time myself because I haven't practiced the presentation, but I did write all of the document. So I appreciate the board very much and the position that you're in. I also appreciate all of the audience comments and what they represent. So as Joe Garza said, the first option is elementary consolidation and redistricting, and that's an independent option. But the second option is, again, what Joe Garza said, district-wide consolidation, redistricting, and restructuring. And that one includes number 1. So just so everybody understands that, number 1 could stand alone, but number 2 includes number 1. The difference between the two then is in number 1, elementary stays K through 6, but in number 2, elementary moves K through 4. So I'll move through the document. I call this validation, and really what I'm doing is validating the district's work. I'm not validating my own work. And because the district wanted its work validated, it doesn't mean that the district is going to move forward with it. Rather, it means another set of eyes, experienced eyes, take a look at it to see, for example, are the numbers correct? And as I go through this, I also looked at validating 2 other things that I thought were important to the validation process. So section 1, what was my scope of work? First of all, it was budget driven. So when Joe called me up out of the blue and asked if I'd be available to do this, the point was it's not driven by other factors than the budget. In other words, we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't have a budget issue that we would be looking at, and it's a short-term and it's a long-term issue. The district due diligence development was done by a lot of the district staff, and then they had a couple of consultants that were specific topic consultant. I was independent to all of that. For example, the report that I'm presenting tonight, I didn't ask board members, for example, or administrators, may I present this or may I not present it, because that would have been a lack of independence. But I did ask all the people that were involved in it, am I being accurate from your point of view? So a lot of different eyes looked at it, a lot of two-way communication. So thank you to those people on staff that were involved in this. The scope of my work, Joe pretty much talked about it. The bolded parts to validate district due diligence on each option, to identify any gaps, and I did identify some gaps, not anybody's fault, but having worked through this before, I brought up some things, which was added value, I hope, but certainly not added value to cause something to happen, but just the process. And then to compile the due diligence and validation as we're doing tonight. And then I added a couple of other different dimensions, which you see bolded. And I can, I think, switch this now. Yeah. So certainly efficiency and budget savings was the driver. Are the projections realistic? But another one was, is it feasible? So as I go through this, I'll comment that some things are more feasible than others. So I'm not trying to color code something as being feasible if it isn't feasible, or if more due diligence is needed in order to convince me, for example, as an independent consultant that it's feasible, then we'll do that, because not all the feasibility due diligence can be done in a short period of time. One quick example of that would be for option 2, what is the impact of the traffic on Cleveland, for example, if all of the high school students would be at West and all of the 5 through 8 at Eisenhower. We haven't commissioned a traffic study, for example, to take a look at that. If there is seriousness to take a look at it, as the board goes along, there'd be further due diligence, is the illustration there. And then I did an initial qualitative analysis, and many people have spoken tonight. If the dollars make sense, that's one thing, but it still needs to be feasible. That's another thing. But is it beneficial? Is it good? Will it sustain the quality of the school district of New Berlin? And I listed some of the values of New Berlin that were in your publications. I won't read them for you, but I based my validation on that rather than my own sensibilities. So as far as the due diligence goes, we met 6 times with administrators so I could get as deep of understanding of the district as I could, and particularly understanding of the budget, and particularly understanding of these 2 consolidation pieces. My job wasn't to solve the whole problem. My job wasn't to solve really any problem, but my job was to flesh out these 2 consolidation options relative to the criteria that was set forth. So the report is not intended to promote or demote either consolidation option. So for those came here tonight thinking I'd have a recommendation, I don't. But I don't have a non-recommendation either. I have validated due diligence that a reasonable person could agree or disagree with, but at least there's a lot of information that hopefully is balanced information, and it's in one place. And the purpose is to address the district's structural budget deficit. And you can read what's there, and that was talked about in some detail at the district's annual meeting, so I won't get into that. So, option 1, and I do a high level, kind of an executive summary right here. I'll take some responsibility, by the way, for this meeting being called on short notice, because some of that's because of my lack of availability. So my bad for that, not the board's. And I finished this document for the board packet last Wednesday, It took a fair amount of time to do it, and the meeting was put in place before I was leaving for China tomorrow. So let me take some responsibility off the board for that timing piece, because it's true what I just said. So consolidation option number 1, the closing of Orchard Lane, redistricting K6, et cetera. Here is my initial blush on that. It was understood in the validation process, and again, I worked with the administrators on this. It's an available source of efficiency and resulting budget savings. Just an available source. It doesn't mean the source will be used, but it's available. It's feasible for implementation given the existing and projected enrollments and class size guidelines. In other words, K through 6 students would fit at the other schools. Doesn't mean they should fit, but they could fit. And then qualitatively, that's would it be beneficial. The change is not incurring change of existing grade level configurations. There's still grades K through 6 and 9, 7 through 12, and it doesn't change attendance boundaries for grades 7 through 12. So it's substantial change, but it's not as substantive of change as consolidation option 2. So those are 3 that could work, but I put a but in here, but it wasn't viewed as providing substantial enough efficiency and budget savings to avoid an operational referendum in the near future. So if the problem we're trying to solve is the budget problem, this would contribute to solving that, but it wouldn't solve that in and of itself. So that's the high-level view of option 1. And the rest of this document will illustrate that in some detail. But let me give you the high-level view of option 2. And again, you know what it is. All the elementary students would be in 3 of the schools and would only be K through 4 in Elmwood, Poplar Creek, and Ronald Reagan Elementary Schools, because Orchard Lane would be closed per the first option. And then there'd be reuse or repurposing of New Berlin Eisenhower into grades 5 through 8, reuse and repurposing of New Berlin West, where we are tonight, into grades 9 through 12. And athletic facilities would be shared, because there are good athletic facilities at both campuses, and that was viewed as an asset that those athletic facilities would be there. Would there be added transportation? Yes, and that's commented on later on in the document. So things that were viewed as positive in the validation process, it is a source of substantial enough efficiency and resulting budget savings to avoid an operational referendum for the next 5 years. That's probably one of the biggest statements in the document, because it's substantial enough, the 2 of them together. It doesn't mean that should happen, but it provides an option. Maybe not a popular option, but an option. I'm not here to make it sound popular, but I'm not here to necessarily diminish it either. The second point, it's feasible at all elementary schools and potentially feasible, notice the potentially feasible, at Eisenhower and West, pending further due diligence. So internal due diligence would be on numbers of classroom and their percentage utilization. And I think a document was passed out, done by another consultant, that in fact it would fit, for example, but the numbers were based upon like 30 per classroom, and were based upon use of the classroom for all the periods of the day. That's not a bad, that's just the maximum capacity. So more due diligence would be needed, for example, if there's board interest in pursuing more due diligence of exactly how it would fit. So it would fit, but it would conditionally fit because would we like how it would fit, for example? And I'm not talking about the quality, I'm not talking about the traffic, not talking about moving high schools or lost opportunities. It's just would it fit in a way that is feasible rather than everybody being crowded into places. So, and then the external piece would be a traffic study to see, for example, what the impact on the roads would be and the times of getting to school of all students in the district going to Ike in grades 5 through 8, and all students in the district coming here for grades 9 through 12. In order to say those are both feasible, considerable study would be needed, and in order to warrant that considerable study, the board would have to, I think, lean one way or another as to whether that's needed or not. So I see this as kind of a mid-level of detail. There's enough detail that it's just not an opinion one way or another, but there's not such substantive, minute, granular detail that it looks like we're going someplace with it, because it's not there at this point. The third one is having qualitative educational pluses and minuses as illustrated later in this document. Qualitative meaning, well, I'll wait and illustrate it later, otherwise I won't go as efficiently as I'd like to. The next page, but it was viewed, and again the but is underlined, it was viewed as representing major organizational change for the district in transitioning from two separate grades, 7 through 12, school communities, into one district-wide community starting in grades 5, 8, and continuing through grades 9 through 12. Many of the audience members commented on that tonight. I commented on it also. You know, that's a but. That's a downside in doing that. Whenever you do things like that, they have upsides and downsides. I try to be balanced in how I put this together. So the extent of change implied by consolidation option 2 was viewed as a short-term change management and logistics challenge. Now, everybody in the room might disagree with that. Those are my words, because whenever you do major change, you have to manage the change, and nobody likes to be managed necessarily, but it has to be. And then it's a logistics challenge, both internally and externally, as I was illustrating. But yet it was also viewed as potentially feasible with adequate time for preparation. What is adequate time for preparation? I would suggest not by next fall, for example, if there was a decision to do that, because the amount of time to do it well would be something that would be important to this process that I'm commenting on. Qualitatively equivalent educational option that could provide substantive long-term efficiency and budget savings for the district was also viewed as preferable to continuation of annual budget reductions in programs, services, and maintenance. So that's a choice that many of the speakers commented on tonight, is couldn't you do more annual budget reductions, programs, services, and maintenance? The district obviously could do that, but it was viewed by the people that I worked with in developing this validation that the consolidation option was viewed as preferable to all of the continuing cuts on an annual basis that might otherwise be the case. So moving on to section 2. Section 2 is just a reference section, so there's information that people might wonder about, and it's all in the same place. So it talks about the district enrollment at the end of last year. It talks about the 5-year projected enrollments. Sounds like that may be recommissioned, but that's the current one that the district is using. I try to source as much of the information as I can. Then class size guidelines. You can see that the first two are very, very specific. The third one was developed by interaction with Kelly, who's here tonight, and administrators of 30 students or less, with exception based on classroom limitations. And you can see what they are here. And then school enrollments are listed here, just so you can get a sense of them. 4 sections, school means 4 classrooms of every grade level. And then the pupil transportation baseline is listed because the transportation question was raised. You can see what the current budget for transportation is. You can see what it's proposed for next year. That's information was presented at the annual meeting. Later on in the presentation, we'll give a projection of how it would go up with consolidation, but other things would obviously come down in terms of cost. So moving on to section 3, now we're going into more detail on option 1. So if you're interested in option 1 or not interested in option 1, I'm going to be talking about it for a few minutes. So at the beginning of this, I referenced the survey data, so that one of the purposes of this is sometimes school boards get all kinds of information, but they're left to connect the dots. Like each consultant will comment on a different thing, or each influence will influence a different thing. But who puts the whole together for them? Well, the superintendent or a consultant tries to connect the dots, for example. So I tried to connect some dots on here, not to present a recommendation, but to include prior information with current information. So I won't read that to you, but it's there for reference. So then enrollment is the next piece. And I'll just reference those a little bit. So if Orchard Lane were to close, you can see in your document, because you all have it, you can see what Elmwood, Poplar Creek, and Ronald Reagan would look like in terms of school size. in terms of sections and in terms of average class size. So I put those together, not new information, but information in the same place, so people know, for example, if they're commenting, would it fit or not fit, this would fit with those class sizes. And then there would be 10.25 savings in staff, and we use the 75,000 all-in package figure for that, so you can see the amount of the savings would be there, and that would be for instructional staff only by closing of Orchard Lane. Moving on now to the quantitative efficiency. Well, before I do that, I'll comment on the other thing. In addition to the instructional savings, there would be other personnel savings, which is $617,389. The positions are listed. Utility savings, the number is listed. Pupil transportation, there's no change in the number of buses or routes, so negligible change in costs for that. So projected total budget savings, you can see from option 1, is just over 1.4 million. It's a sizable amount, but it doesn't go far enough to solve the structural deficit that was commented on at the annual meeting. Now, we talked about whether Orchard Lane would stay open or not. Obviously, that's a board decision. But another alternative to do that is to contemplate at the front end, if you choose to close the school, that it wouldn't be reopened again, that it would be rented, for example, or it would be sold, and the board making a conscious decision that if enrollment were to grow, you could add either classrooms or you could add common space at either one of your other 3 schools, which would mean you'd be spending some capital costs, but you wouldn't be increasing your operational costs because you wouldn't be putting a school back online after you've taken it off. Whether you choose to do that or not, it's a common practice when schools are closed, but enrollment grows again. Then further savings that we didn't finish validating is projected moving costs, unsure at this point, closing Orchard Lane and moving all of the equipment, furniture, et cetera. A projected enrollment loss of closing Orchard Lane and redistricting. There was a sense there may be some enrollment loss related to that. There'd be some savings in deferred maintenance. The number there is $575,000 of maintenance that if we're going to keep it online, keep it operating, that would be incurred at some point in time. Projected annual revenue, unknown. Projected market value of selling, you can see the numbers that are listed, and you can see the source that's there. So none of this really needs further due diligence if there's a decision not to close. But if there would be a leaning toward closing or if it stayed on the table, then this additional due diligence would be the next step. We'd provide more detail. Implementation feasibility, would the options work? So implementation feasibility was validated per the above projected enrollment sections and grades K-3 and 4 through 6 class size average within district guidelines. So the point is it's feasible, it could work. And then the qualitative analysis. I don't want to take the time to read through the whole paragraph with you because you all have that. What I comment on in the first paragraph is what we had to do in my prior experience of celebrating the past and grieving the past, and then making sure the opportunity was provided for staff and families to be welcome in the other schools. Probably more substantive, though, is the next paragraph in terms of how many times children would have to move. So the encouragement from the team that worked on this, which I've written up, is to be very conscious of, for example, if the board were to say, let's do consolidation option 1 sooner, and then in consolidation option 2, and number 1 would already be done later, they should think long-term so that specific students that are in the process don't have like 4 transitions or even 3 transitions. It would be the idea of a long-range plan in terms of if there's a decision to implement either one of these, to think about how the timing would work for particular students and families that would be involved. Moving on to section 4, which is the additional due diligence on option 2. And again, option 2 includes number 1, but I won't be commenting on number 1 very much. Again, it includes the narrative and the numbers from the last survey. So there's no attempt here to have this presentation say something different than last presentations. This presentation is just kind of deliberately to include all the data that we have to date and look through it. So looking at enrollments, again, of what would the elementary schools look like if they were now K through 4 rather than K through 6. So Elmwood would be 503, Poplar Creek 363, Ronald Reagan 612, and you can see the sections would be largely the same, and you can see what the class sizes would be. So again, it provides more room than obviously K through 6 in the schools because there are 2 grade levels that aren't in the schools. So there's more growing room there for enrollment with consolidation, option 2. District-wide grades 5-8 at Eisenhower projected enrollment of 1259. That's more students than are there now. And district-wide grades 9 through 12 at West 1533. Considerably more students that are here now, but different usages too. More similar usages at the high school, and I'll get into some of the qualitative parts of that in a while. So then the savings from the K through 4 is 9.77 staff, which again times the same 75,000, 732,750. Instructional savings already included in consolidation. So this is not counted directly because it's counted in 1. So if 1 occurs, you can't take the savings twice if 2 occurs. So going on to the next, but at least you know what it is. So the quantitative efficiency and budget savings. So you can see I factored in consolidation option 1. Then option 2 would add staff savings from grades 7 and 8 of 225,000. Staff savings from grades 9 through 12 of 525,000. And then there was an earlier study done that consolidating the 2 middle schools and 2 high schools, there would be athletic savings of 550,000. It's an earlier estimate. Disclaimer is I did not validate that, but if we're moving forward, that would need to be validated more. Now, in terms of the pupil transportation, the prior chief financial officer, the new one, and also an independent one named Patrick Starkin, who's worked with the district before and worked with other districts, took a look at it and took a look at it in a not a specific route manner, but in how the routes would work. And there would be 3 tiers. There would be and each would be about 45 minutes. So it would be a first, a second, and a third in the morning, first, second, and third in the afternoon. The estimate is $345,000 increase in transportation. It would increase because not more buses, but because of more time on the roads with the 3 tiers, morning and afternoon. And there would be efficiency savings. The district has recently purchased software that the number of buses may be able to be reduced, but again, the study that I'm doing here didn't allow time for doing that, so we didn't factor those savings in. Projected increase in athletic transportation was plugged in from an earlier study, and projected loss of student parking revenue at Eisenhower was a number that you see there. I think people know that there's more parking at Eisenhower than there is at West, and I think people also know that if all of the students that were eligible to drive were at one campus, they all couldn't drive. So we talked about, for example, how that would need to be prioritized to students who absolutely needed to drive, maybe because of youth options classes or some compelling reason like that would get first priority. So where am I at? Okay, caught up with myself. Okay, the projected total savings then from this option, which includes the first one, would be $2,319,752. Implementation feasibility. It was validated at all 3 elementary schools, potentially validated at Eisenhower and West, again, pending the due diligence. And here are the later feasibility questions that are the major ones, that while we have classroom numbers of all the classrooms in each school, and we have them all allocated to subject areas, and the 2 high school principals did a great job with that. We don't necessarily know how many periods per day, for example, all the classrooms would be used. It wouldn't be that they would be absolutely full, but there wouldn't be as much flexibility as now. Like, I think now some teachers are used to having their own room and, you know, preparing in their own room, for example, and having their own room be available during times that it's not scheduled. If the schools were more full, there would be more utilization of given classrooms. Some people say, well, that's great, because then the teachers could have a common planning area and plan together, and we get more efficiency from use of the school as a whole. Other people would say, no, it doesn't work that way. So the long and short of that is we wanted to take a more in-depth look, and I would actually like to look at it on the visual illustrated floor plans of each school. This particular room will be used for this subject this many periods during the day, with this kind of enrollment, so you can get a really good idea of what the school would look like to spend your days in for both 5-8 and 9-12. And that's very doable, but I don't know if that's necessary at this point in the process, because that gets more granular. But it could be. The bus route modeling of both 5-8 and 9-12 could be done, again, if there was interest in doing this, so people would have a good idea of what their bus route would look like. Right now, we just have the broad view of what the busing would look like. Again, that's a lot of detail that isn't necessary if there's not interest in pursuing the option further, but would be necessary prior to any kind of a decision. And then the traffic study related to increased use of Cleveland in particular. There need to be some involvement with the city relative to that too, because the city and the school district are pretty much one. You know, there's some parts of the city that go to 2 other school districts, but they're small parts. And then how to prioritize limited student parking at West. So those are still things that we didn't have time to do, and probably this validation at this point didn't necessitate them being done. So the next one is the qualitative analysis. So any reasonable person, I think, could disagree with the pluses and minuses here. But this is the staff conversations that I convened with the administrators there that came up with these things. So for grades 5-8, potential pluses is it maintains program options for grades 7 and 8. What that means is if we don't consolidate, or if we don't pass a referendum, the district will get into cutting program options, which they haven't done before. Sufficient enrollments to efficiently run advanced classes on site would be another one. So more students, for example, taking algebra or taking geometry or taking something in one place. Increased focus on developmental middle school student needs, because again, right now, and this is not good or bad, but right now, to some extent, there are 2 middle schools, but both are attached to high schools. If we went with this, there would be 1 middle school. It wouldn't have the attachment to high school. There are pros and cons to that, but it was seen as a plus in terms of the developmental needs of the students. Increased content depth for grades 5 and 6. Again, not everybody would agree with that. This is just our conversation. Increased focus on professional development for staff, because all of the teachers teaching a particular level would be together. Potential minuses, you need to break down the large school size, because both of them would be large school sizes, into smaller teaching and learning areas, and there's some examples there. And then adjustments from grades 5 and 6 is the oldest in elementary schools, and grades 7 and 8 is the youngest in high schools, to grades 5, 6, and 7, 8 being together. Again, that was seen as a minus, both of them, because it's just the adjustment, and the adjustment was viewed more as short-term than long-term, but still major being short-term. So moving on to grades 9 through 12. It's not necessarily tracking, but it's okay. So grades 9 through 12, you all have it in writing anyway. Potential pluses, and I say potential pluses because it's in the eye of the beholder, whether it's a plus or not. I didn't want to call it a plus, but we viewed some things as potential pluses and some as minuses. So increased programming courses in all curriculum areas because you have more students in one place, including capstone courses. Capstone courses meaning last course in sequence, which are in most subject areas. Sufficient enrollments to run elective classes annually versus alternate years. That's a problem in every high school I've experienced, is kids putting their schedule together and do they have access to all classes when they need it. With efficient class sizes. So I was talking to Nicole Jones, HR person, for example, of can all class sizes be efficient? Well, they can be if you don't run all the classes that students want to take every year. But if you run all the classes that students want to take, at least alternate years, you end up having inefficiencies in class size, but you do it for the sake of the students because you don't want to deny them the opportunity to take the classes. So that would just be, there'd be more efficiency in that if there are more numbers in a particular school. You'd have specialized classroom facilities versus shared use classrooms. That's particularly true probably in science. You'd have decreased staff travel between the two high schools that exist right now. Increased academic competition for high-performing students. In other words, competing with one another as a district as a whole. Equalized resources for underperforming students. There was some sense that they would be more equalized in one place than they are right now. Didn't get into detail. Increased efficiency in delivery of student services, things like guidance counseling, for example, social work, school psychology, and increased focus on professional development for staff. So in other words, if you had a bigger mass of students in one place, you could do probably more things for them, but the potential minuses are potential for larger class sizes in electives that have sufficient enrollment to offer annually. So larger class sizes, even though the classes would be offered, there'd be larger class sizes. Adjustments from 2 high school community and culture to 1 high school community and culture, potential minus. Some people here tonight, maybe all of you would say not potential, it is a minus. Transitioning from perceptions of Eisenhower versus West, perceptions of New Berlin versus other metro area districts. And just for a moment, let's turn to the very back page, just to illustrate that. The very back page, just for context, shows you the high schools in the CESA 1, Cooperative Educational Service Agency, which all these districts belong to. And there's no value judgment here. It just shows where New Berlin, Eisenhower, New Berlin West are now with the 7 through 12. And then if the New Berlin was a consolidated option, where it would be in terms of where it would be relative to the other schools. Would that involve some realignment of the WIAA? Yes. Would that involve probably a different conference, playing other schools? Yes. Would that be a plus or a minus? Both, depending upon point of view. Cuts both ways is the point. So transitioning specific school scholarships to district high school scholarships, someone brought up, because some people are in the Eisenhower community and they give scholarships to Eisenhower students, some in the West community. Would they be open to transferring their scholarship if it were one New Berlin high school? So probably a lot more minuses, but these are the ones that we came up with in the time that we had. Athletic and other co-curricular differences, potential pluses, sustained budget support for athletic and other co-curricular areas. There was a reality statement that we can't afford it ×2 anymore because we have to reduce something. We don't want to reduce classroom, but we need to reduce something, for example, and we don't want to reduce this if we can avoid it. Increased levels of external competition due to larger school size. That's seen kind of as a powerhouse, a mentality of what it could be. Again, reasonable people could agree or disagree. Reduced travel for academic or co-curricular areas, such as robotics, for example, and adjusting to a probable different conference due to a larger school size. And then minuses, increased competition, decreased opportunities for starting positions on varsity teams. Some people commented on that tonight. Increased competition, decreased options for starring roles in top performing groups. Travel to athletic facilities located at one school, like the pool at Eisenhower. Cost of replacing logos, uniforms, adding athletic lockers, adjusting to probable, again, different conference due to larger school size. Notice I put that on both of them, because some people would say it's about time, and other people would say it's never time to do that. So reasonable people could disagree relative to that. So going on to section 5. This is the validation, and it's not on the slide up there, but there are 4 things that I listed here that are examples of validation. The focused discussion on the validation criteria. In other words, we ran both options through the 3 criteria of budget, feasibility, and is it beneficial? Is it qualitatively good? So we're doing both kind of in a parallel fashion. That's a validation idea. So the same criteria got applied to everything. The seeking clarity without granularity piece, if you get into the more and more detail that you get into, you could say they're going to do this, or you could say this would never work. Because you have so much detail, you can't see the big because there are so many parts there. But absent, the amount of detail that's here, you kind of come in with opinion that this is good or this is bad. But it's not terribly well fleshed out. So the attempt here is to flesh it out kind of mid-range detail, enough so that the board, for example, can have a reasonable conversation on some comparable data, saying is it worth the next round to get additional information or not. And I'm so glad there's so many community members here tonight. Third, pupil transportation consultant. I commented on that earlier. There's a little bit more detail here. He reviewed projected busing costs. It was initially lower. He actually added to it. That's one of the benefits of taking a second look. And then you can see a little bit more detail here on how much could be saved if we could reduce the number of buses through that district software. Finally, just the financial accountability. There was some sense that there wasn't as much transparency prior to the last operational referendum as people wanted. I think that contributed to an independent consultant coming in and doing this. But I just take a look at the financial accountability that occurs with one business manager leaving and another one coming, and they're both having to share all their work with me, for example. I mean, there aren't a lot of secrets there because they're looking at each other, but then I'm also asking them questions that they have to dig for the answer relative to that. And I didn't get into a lot of that because my purpose wasn't budget validation or pre-referendum validation. My purpose was validation of homework on consolidation options. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll turn it back to you, Amy.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gibson. Just as a reminder, this was a presentation that has been given. We wanted to make sure that we had the context behind just the documentation. So, a lot of, we're seeing this all kind of at the same time. So I really want to take time to digest. We did ask Dr. Gibson to come back on September 23rd if possible. And, again, one thing I want to clarify for that Mr. Garza clarified as well is this is just one option. There are many different things we're still looking at. We'll be talking about in the next couple of meetings, everything from refinancing our debt, open enrollment, continued cuts, referendum, and consolidation. So this is just one. And what we wanted to do is numbers attached to it. We didn't want to make any decisions unless we knew that there was actual real numbers attached to any of these items. And so that was why we commissioned this study. But what I will do is open it up to the board for now for questions, and then we'll continue on from there. So I'm going to start with my question. So the idea of fifth grade and middle school is a little concerning. Would these numbers work with keeping the fifth grade in the grade school and just having a 6 through 8? Is that something that I don't know if you have an answer today, but looking at the first option, it looks like we can continue for a little bit of time with K through 6, and then I think we buy more time if we go K through 4. I just didn't know if the K through 5.
Intuitively, it works. I think before conclusively, we take a look at what it looks like for balancing the sections. But if K through 6 works and K through 4 really works in 3 schools rather than 4, could grade 5 be put back or not move from the three schools. I think I could say yes to that, but we just haven't done the due diligence on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I thought we were looking at that as well. Just another quick question, and it actually might go to Joe regarding the selection of West versus Eisenhower. Because the parking, it's greater at Eisenhower, but yet West was teed up as the high school potential. Was that something that we recommended out versus?
That's what we had proposed originally.
Okay.
And again, Dr. Gibson's task was to validate our original proposals. What I can tell you is just sheer square footage. You have more square footage here. You've got larger learning spaces. You've got more classrooms, and you've got facilities like the field house here that we do not have at Eisenhower. And so mainly just due to the size of the building.
Okay, thank you.
And I just took that as an assumption. I didn't do due diligence on it. I took that as a given, but if, I'm not looking for more work, but we could, for example, look at it both ways.
The number you shared with the cost savings for staff in the elementary schools, that's increasing class sizes then, correct?
No, it's an increase in efficiency by having more students in one place. You can take a look at the class sizes. That's why I put both of them in.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was trying to follow that, but this is the first I'm digesting
Sure.
information.
No, I'm not calling you out then. I'm not seeing it, but I think the answer is in there. Let's turn to it though.
I was trying to follow the class size. On Reagan, it says 33 to 35, Elmwood 28.
So on page 5, you can see the class sizes for K through 6. If you all look at page 5, you can see the average class sizes.
What were they?
And that's based upon projected for this year. And then.
So it shows your numbers here, but it doesn't show the numbers what they are today. So you're proposing the exact same class sizes today as in the future with this proposal?
This is based upon projected enrollment for this year. So projected enrollment divided by number of sections. It still came up with the amount of savings that was there.
It also stays within the guidelines that we've used, which is an average of 30 or less grades 4 through 6, and an average of 26 or less in grades kindergarten through 3.
But the 10 staff that we'd be eliminating would be classroom teachers. Is that correct?
Yes.
A combination of classroom teachers and special teachers. Right. It's all instructional staff, but it's mostly classroom teachers.
But in grade school, class sizes would have to go up. If you eliminate a classroom teacher, those kids have to go to another classroom.
What tends to happen in a little
For high school, I can see that because you might have a class size with 10 kids and you may eliminate a class and that can consolidate, but there's not really wiggle room in grade schools.
What it tends to happen is when you have a 3-section school, for example, where the splits are, there's less opportunity. So on average, the class size will go up a little bit in order to create the efficiency. But when you take a look at what the class sizes are on page 7, you can make the value judgment of how much they went up. I just made the value judgment they're still within class size guidelines, and we saw the efficiency. But it's mainly having more students in one place, and there's more efficiency with special teachers too. Art, music, Phi-Ed, for example, of operating 3 schools versus 4 schools. Not saying either one is right, but I'm just sharing the thought process.
And then where in this, I didn't see anything on 3K, 4K. Does this leave flexibility to have 3K, 4K? And how many class sizes did you build into that?
I didn't do anything with 3K or 4K. I just started with the all-day 5-year-old kindergarten that you have right now. Without having looked at it, there aren't extra classrooms that would be available for adding programs, which 3K and 4K would be in consolidation option 1. I would say that without taking a look at it, it would be there would be room for enrollment growth in grades all day 5-year-old kindergarten through 6, but not a lot of room, because you can see that the schools are 4 or 5 section schools, and all of those classrooms are used to deliver the class size that's there. So it doesn't leave room for added programs. And if you had substantial enrollment growth, what's suggested in here is rather than reopening an Orchard Lane, you'd build on more classrooms if you needed more classrooms.
And what
One of
number
the
roughly
three
do you
schools.
see that at, that we would then need to add an expansion onto one of the buildings? Is it 50 kids, 100 kids? I didn't see anything in there.
Would you say one more time?
At what point of increased enrollment would we have to add on to one of those buildings then if we?
Sure. I don't have the answer to that. A district that I know well is doing an enrollment study like that right now, so the due diligence is out there, but I didn't get into that due diligence. I'll write that down as a question. Okay.
We will be bringing an updated enrollment study to the board in early November.
Okay. My concern with that was if you eliminate 3K and 4K, that's your feeder program to your school, so.
And just a point of clarification, we do not have a traditional 4-year-old kindergarten or a 3-year-old kindergarten that's assumed by other school districts or identified by the state DPI. What we do have is an early childhood program, which is students with disabilities ages 3 through 5, which are not a large number of students. We also have a tuition-based 3K and 4K program, but again, it's tuition-based, not offered necessarily as a district program. I mean, it is, but it is outside of the purview of a traditional, what's understood as 4K and 3K. And then we do have some students that are eligible based on their eligibility and when they test into the program. So they're typically students that are at risk or students that are below the 25th percentile, which again, right now, Royce, is it 3 or 4 classrooms that we have for those programs? For our 3K and 4K in early childhood?
We have 3 classrooms right now. We have our classroom that holds 3s and 4s, which runs both afternoon and morning, and our early childhood classroom.
And so what we offer is a non-traditional approach where districts offer a universal 4K, which has not been on the table in this school district.
And the main reason for that is because we're a donor district, correct? It would be a lot more expensive for us to offer that program because we'd have to.
It would raise taxes, certainly. And to be quite honest with you, we don't need it based on the students that we screen every 3 and 4-year-old student. And the majority of our students don't need that type of programming for readiness for kindergarten. And again, to the point where we only have 3 classrooms that includes the students at risk, the early childhood students identified by IEPs and or tuition-based.
The tuition-based program is fairly new though, right? We've been doing that, what, 2 or 3 years now, is that?
Yes.
Correct, okay. And what are those numbers at this year? Do you have that offhand?
I do not.
Okay. Sorry for all the questions.
No, that's okay.
You're dismissed.
Yep. I'll get you back. No, but I'll get you those numbers, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Gibson, I have a few questions for you. The first is when you said that you were informed that consolidation was viewed as preferable to other options. Who informed you of that?
What was my source for that?
Yeah.
My source were the administrators that I sat with, so Mr. Garza, Dr. Garza, Kelly, the other Kelly that's behind me, the high school principals.
Sure, okay.
For example.
As a point of clarification, if we were asked to either consolidate schools or eliminate student programs, we would certainly recommend consolidating schools. We are not recommending it, either option, but if we were tasked to continue to cut millions of dollars annually to meet our budget shortfall, as opposed to eliminating student programs, when asked, that would be our preference because that's what we're about, that's what our mission is, that's what our vision is, that's what our values are, and it's part of our strategic goals. So again, when we're tasked to do that, you've got and other individuals have mentioned that, you've got competing interests, and sometimes there's only so much to go around. And so again, if, for example, I'm a parent in the district too, and if I have to see my students take AP courses or some of the technical skills courses or things like that, either be eliminated or have to travel across town, I'd probably have to travel across town instead.
So I think that, Joe, I think that you're not really getting the point of what I'm saying here. I think
Okay.
that what I'm asking is, where you've indicated that consolidation was a preferable option to other options, it's not between consolidation and cutting programs. That's not the whole field. And to say that it is, I think is disingenuous. And I think that we have to really talk about the other options that Amy was talking about earlier, which is there's a whole field of options in front of us as a board to decide how we're going to proceed with the budget shortfall we're facing. And it's not limited to those two choices. So I think, again, that's not a complete summation of what we're looking at.
And I do want to clarify that. I do want to clarify that
Sure.
Dr. Gibson's question to us was related to that, but then he also does understand that there are all these other things at hand. But when he asked us that specifically, that was our response.
Okay, and I think that I was just troubled when I heard him say that this was I was informed that this was preferable to other options available. That was troubling to me because then I worry about how the message is delivered and how we are getting this information that is so critical to our decision-making process. And if we're not, the process is important. You see what I'm saying?
I don't disagree with anything that you're saying.
So, all right, so that having been out there, I think is fine. I do want to ask also, Dr. Gibson, in your inquiry, did you have an opportunity to review the 2011 capacity study that was completed by IFF for this district?
I did not.
Okay. Because I believe, and I apologize, I don't have that capacity study in front of me, but I believe that some of the numbers that are contemplated in your enrollment figures on page 5, including numbers at Elmwood for a projected enrollment of 730 kids, I believe would put that building over capacity from the study that was completed in 2011, which would be problematic. So that's one, but I think that in order to make these analyses, that capacity study I think is critical since that's the most recent document we have in the district to determine what our capacity is in all of our buildings. So it seems like that was unfair to leave that out for you.
Sure, I was aware of that. I didn't review it, but I was aware of it. And capacity studies at whether they're elementary, middle school, or high school are based on a set of assumptions.
Mhm.
So if we continue to be interested in that, I think we should review it, but I think a current capacity study would probably be more valuable than a capacity study from a period of time because they're based upon the assumptions of whoever the IFF, for example, does. So I tended to use just current class size guidelines rather than capacity study at this stage, but your question's really, it's really fair.
Okay, and then I had...
Matt, I did want to just mention that the board now has in their hand the document that we did review that essentially the approach was if we had to have every student in school at the same time, what would that maximum capacity be? And so the document that you have, which was essentially walked through by several administrators, including principals and other buildings and ground staff, as validated by KPH, which is a contracting firm, essentially updates your point related to the IFF study of what the maximum capacity could actually be at each of the schools. And so the ones that you have in front of you are for both the middle school and the high school option. And so those numbers are before you.
I guess really quick too, I want to clarify that, we didn't want to get super granular because we don't want to waste time on something that, if we're going to move forward or if we want to consider moving forward, which, I mentioned that we have these 6 items or 5 items that we're going to talk about. We would definitely, if this was something we wanted to get more information, we would go more granular. But this is just a presentation to say the numbers that administration gave us back in when we were looking at, we were having budget sessions and talking to the public, do they make sense? Are they even viable? So that's what Matt Gibson, or Dr. Gibson's task was. It's not to flesh out everything, like he said before. And if we decide we want to move forward with more granular, we would definitely need to get a lot more information before we would move forward. So to be fair, that he was just tasked to really kind of validate those numbers, look at the feasibility, outline what we would still need to look forward, and if it's not something we're moving forward with, we wouldn't go any further than this study.
I did have another question related to your comment, Dr. Gibson, about a traffic study on Cleveland Avenue. Since this facility would be contemplated as the high school, it would increase the traffic, more drivers driving their cars to school. You've already indicated that the parking passes would have to be limited because of the fact that we wouldn't have the amount of parking necessary for all the parking passes we currently issue, right?
Correct.
So you also made a comment that was puzzling to me, though, because you said that we would have to work with the city and find out about how this would all work in terms of the traffic issues. Is that?
I did say that.
Okay, but Cleveland, and I'm not sure if you know, but Cleveland is a county road.
County, then I stand corrected.
So if that is the case, then would the proper procedure be to appeal to the county rather than the city? Because wouldn't they be making the decision about whether they would force our hand in terms of increased cost?
Good point.
Okay, so that's something that
Point
we would
taken.
have to, but that would be I just want to make sure I'm right about that, because I wasn't sure, I've never done this before.
Kristalyn, really quick, we did have a meeting with the city, and that was validated
By the
city
city.
office, that it would be the county that would
That's what I thought,
petition.
and that's why I was
That's
so
correct.
confused about that.
Right.
Okay, all right.
But
So
understand why you wouldn't know that. It's-
Right, because you don't live here, and I understand that, but I just want to make sure that my understanding was not wrong.
Thank you.
Okay.
I stand corrected.
And one last question I have, and I don't know that this is so much for you, Dr. Gibson, as this is for administration. Dr. Gibson indicated that he finished his report last Wednesday. This report was uploaded several hours ago. Why was there a week delay? Because I didn't have a chance to review it before this meeting. I think nobody else in this room really had a chance to review it. I don't think any of us board members had a chance to review it. I mean, in depth, I can't speak for everybody, but I can tell you that my review was peripheral at best, and this is not how I like to do business. What happened, and how can we fix it in the future?
I guess I can just make one comment. We, and it is more to do, no direction was given, but as far as releasing it to the public or releasing it, we wanted context behind it so that it wasn't, because right now, if you just read this, there wouldn't be any context behind it. So that's the reason, really, tonight he was just here to present, and he's coming back on the 23rd for us to continue to ask questions, because we need time to digest it. But without the context, I don't feel that we would have, he probably would answer the questions that we would have, and reading it out of context is.
I would just add to that, if I might. The question even was not to me, but David and I had conversations as recent as last night. I sent him a correction. For example, in the document that I sent last week, I continued to pore over it, and I realized I'd counted something twice. The savings in the utilities at Orchard Lane I'd counted along with staff, but it was also counted separately. So I asked him to change that. That's just one example. There are a couple of others, but they're less substantive than that. So I sent the document. Both of these two gentlemen were on me with a deadline of trying to get it at the middle of last week for good reasons, but I was still making corrections as of what I just said. So.
Thank you. I guess the only other question I have is related to, should the board determine that they want to proceed further down this road, how does one effectively calculate all of the soft costs associated with closing so many schools and changing such a large culture all at once or in pieces in a district in the size of ours? In other words, I know there's research out there about school closure, which is what this is. So how do you quantify that? I really don't know the answer to that. So
Good question. I've noted it. I don't have the answer to the how right now, but I've noted it. Okay. So if you have interest in going further, we can. I don't know if I will. I'm doing one particular phase of this right now, and I don't know if you'll do more phases, but if there's another phase following tonight, someone will look at that. I'd be fascinated to look at it, but right now we haven't looked at it.
want to share, like, nobody wants to do this. This isn't, you started off saying that. This is not where we said, please give us an option to consolidate. Right now, our reality is we have more expense than we have revenue. That's just our reality. And we don't have a way out of it without doing something drastic. So it may not be this, but if it's not this, it's some type of cut or it's something. So it's going to be pick and prioritize. So I just want everyone to stay on track that nobody here wants to do this. The administration's not championing this. It's a reality we all have to deal with. So let's not lose sight of that.
Sure. And I think that that's absolutely true, Susan. I think that we have to do something. My preference has always been that we do something more along the lines of open enrollment, where if anything goes awry with open enrollment, we can walk it back.
And we can still look at that, but keep in mind, we have aged buildings that we put off maintenance. That's not going away, and that's not going to be absorbed by open enrollment. So can some of it cost be offset? Some of it certainly can, but not what we're looking at, and it's not 5 years. We have 10 years of debt out there. It's a real problem, and it's not going to go away just because we want it to.
Sure. I understand what you're saying.
Does anybody on the board have any more questions specific to this study, any of the numbers, anything else, more just on the number side of it and what Dr. Gibson presented?
I have maybe just a comment. I was anticipating that this would have some of the cost side of it, not just the soft costs, but hard costs as well. So I think this, you did validate the potential savings, but it can't possibly be free to just shift all these kids around and change buildings. So I'm surprised to not see some of that information included.
Got the question there. Thank you. Do you want an answer tonight? Okay.
More a comment than a question.
Well, I kept asking questions, to be honest, but all the answers weren't fleshed out, for example, in time for this. So transition in CFO, for example. And I didn't want to present either savings or ads that didn't have a source. So.
On here for the projected market value of selling Orchard Lane, it says $4 to $4.3 million. Now, we've sold 2 schools in the past 10 years, Glen Park and Prospect Hill.
We've sold land.
Okay, well, Glen Park sold for $900,000? Was it 2? Does anyone know? Okay.
I think it was
and
1.2.
Prospect Hill is up for sale, I think just sold for $700,000? So.
But that was
I guess that's where where do we get a $4 million number from? I mean, that's a big leap from what we've seen in the past.
That was one of my conversations, David, with you yesterday. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wanted a source, right? So I think we'd have to go back to the source in order to get that answer.
Yeah, so we had the real estate agent that we used did, it's not necessarily an appraisal, but it is a market analysis of which actually I'm looking to get a second source from Scott's people to validate what those numbers would look like, but that's the estimate that we received. We'll be happy to provide that to the board as well as a source.
Okay.
But just to clarify, your numbers that you presented had nothing to do with selling that property? That was just a side note?
Correct. Your savings, it wasn't baked in your savings.
Nothing was tied to selling the property. You just put that as a side note of the value?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want everybody, to really take time to digest this. So, Dr. Gibson, we would like you to come back on the 23rd. Does anybody have specific questions not opinion but specific questions related to the numbers and something that maybe we would like to have him come back with? I'd ask that we're going to just limit it to 30 minutes, and please remember he is a consultant. He's not here advocating one way or the other, but he is here to answer questions based on the numbers that were provided. So if Yep, you can come forward to the mic and please just ask your question into the mic.
I understand that you're doing the consultant work on behalf of the numbers related directly to the school itself, but I'm wondering if the board has commissioned any type of similar consultant work related to, and I don't have any hard numbers on this, but it's something that popped into my head, the property value associated with the value in a school district. Because again, that's top of mind for me. I just moved into the school district, and the only reason I moved was to get my kids out of the district we were in. That's the only reason I paid an extra $100,000 for the same size house and the same size yard. So we need to take those sorts of things into account, because I was only considering 2 cities, and it was purely based upon the school district and their reputation. And I specifically bought my house in proximity to the school that I wanted my kids to go to. So if there's some way of getting some type of hard numbers around the intrinsic value of a school district tied to each individual property, I think that could help win over those taxpayers who are dead set against this, because all they see is that $100 or $200 a year figure, and they're not taking the long-term into account. And I think if we can put those numbers in front of them, we have a better chance of winning those people over.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, like I said, so many questions, and I'll
Yeah,
keep it
again,
basic.
yep.
I really will.
Okay.
But there are very many questions. But you guys asked a lot of good ones. One of the easy questions that I have is the option 2 savings. Am I correct in assuming that the option 2 savings of $2.3 million is a one-time savings?
Annual, because it's costs that have been cut out of the budget.
Okay, so it's a $2.3 million yearly savings.
Most of it is consulting.
Okay, so we don't know what the one-time savings is, what one-time costs versus ongoing savings and ongoing costs. That would be a useful breakdown to have.
I think it's all recurring.
Next easy question,
So that looks like I didn't see it.
and that might have been addressed here, but it wasn't answered. Can this building hold 1,533 students?
Yes.
Can it hold the 1,525 students that currently exist in the grades in which they exist?
Yes.
So the capacity, can you share this number? The capacity for West is 2,242. 2,242.
That was a 30.
That's a varying because you have so many specials and electives in
Right,
high school.
right.
Grade school, it's 20 kids to a teacher, but in high school, kids are
And the
shifting.
numbers that the board does have in front of them takes into account the specific classroom usage.
I gotta say, I'm just, we're just getting these numbers today, right? These numbers on capacity, when the IFF study that was commissioned by the district in 2011 was something like a 35, 40-page study about capacity. This does not go into the kind of depth that that study went into. It is not the kind of detail that that study went into, and I'm not sure where in the world these numbers came from, other than a contractor walking through our facilities and writing down numbers that they think they could fit kids in the seats. This is not a capacity study, and I don't think it should be relied on as such. I think that's poor management.
I would disagree.
I agree, I know you would.
Well, and again, that would be something, if we move forward to get more granular detail, we would definitely need to do a capacity study again.
Do we have lockers for that many students? If we put every kid here, would we have to build new athletic lockers and new school lockers?
That was
Athletic
that was
lockers?
noted in here, that we would have to have new lockers because we don't have enough for this many kids.
Or is there a cost? Oh, but
There is
there's
no cost tied
that's-
to it, but it's noted in Gibson's report. Yeah.
Again, that's the maximum amount of kids. That's not the kids that would be here. There's certainly a large number difference between the kids that are projected to be here than the maximum capacity.
And if we had that many students, we wouldn't have the issue we have today.
Correct.
Right, because of our revenue, so. Okay, sorry. No, what I'm saying, the number that's here is the maximum. So if you filled every seat at every moment of time, right? And what Joe was saying is we won't hit that number because of our declining enrollment and where we're at. And right now, we are projected not to hit the number that has capacity here, even on the best of days. And if we had that many students, we wouldn't have the budget crisis that we have today.
Okay, the next question that I have is the savings for closing Orchard Lane. If we don't sell the building, we have to maintain it. If we rent the building, we're landlords, so we have to do some sort of maintenance, administration, things like that. I didn't remember seeing any numbers associated with those costs. Do we have those costs? If we close Orchard Lane as a school for us, but we do not sell the building, but instead we leave it vacant or we rent it out for another purpose, there are costs associated with that, I would assume. Do we have an idea of what those costs are? Both one-time and ongoing.
So we do have the rear asphalt is certainly an issue that's needing work to the tune of about $500,000 if we were to keep it open. Certainly, again, if that was sold, then we wouldn't have to deal with that, but that's part of Dr. Gibson's report. We do have utilities of about $52,000 that would go with it. Certainly, we are looking further into what rental would do to it as far as how much rent we could expect, what we could do with it. You know, so for example, one of the things that actually Mitch and I had talked about, as well as our staff that run our ELP, is possibly expanding it so that we can bring in more revenue and, you know, maybe even consider things like a daycare in there where that certainly would be an asset for our staff and maybe other community members, but certainly, again, not to that level of detail.
The busing schedules, you said that there wouldn't be additional buses needed if option 2 were in place. So then are the busing schedules overlapping or are they sequential?
I couldn't hear you, Scott, sorry.
If we go to separate elementary schools, separate middle schools, separate high schools, now we have 3 buses going through basically every neighborhood. Are those buses sequential? Or are they overlapping where, like, you pick up high school students and then those buses get done and they pick up middle school students, but then there's another set of buses that are picking up elementary students?
In most cases, it'd be sequential because in order to maximize a bus per se, the maximum savings is by running them 3 times. So in most cases, you would run them 3 times.
Is there time in the morning and the afternoon to run 3 sequential bus runs?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, that was part of the assessment we had the consultant do, which we had them look at, you know, first of all, is it actually possible to run the scenario, 3 different times? And our concern right now would be students either being picked up too early or being dropped off too late. Matt, I don't know, can you speak to it briefly on what you have there? I don't have it in front of me, so.
Okay, what I'm speaking to in response to the question, I had commented earlier on a 3-tier system, which would be 3 tiers, morning and afternoon, sequentially. First tier would be 7:30. Well, the high school would be 7:30 to 3. No, that's current, proposed. Okay, high school 7:30 to 2:30, middle school 8:15 to 3:15, elementary school 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock would be proposed. Okay? So the upside and downside of sharing something that's conceptual right now is we've just experienced. What I'm trying to illustrate is 3 sequential. And as to which school is first, second, third, and as to what those times are, this is just a first blush at it, but the feedback is still good. So thank you.
I think that illustrates some of the first questions that would come up in a lot of parents' minds. Okay, 2 questions left, and they're easy, maybe. Would option 2, the most drastic option, still not preclude having to go to a referendum? If we went with option 2, would we not have to go to referendum in the next 10 years?
Based on what he recommended, no. mean, if we hit that number and we make that annual savings, again, we have to validate that it's an annual and it's recurring. But that would take care of our, as I understand it,
He
correct
said
me if
in
I'm
his-
wrong.
I thought he said in his presentation, we'd still have to, you suggested that we'd still have to go to
I mean, that's-
referendum. I don't know if it was option 1 or option 2, but I thought I heard him say that.
Option 1, but not option 2.
Was that,
That's
okay,
it.
I didn't see that, that's what I was.
I guess to clarify, that's a tricky question to answer, Scott, because that's making the assumption that this board, A, would not find additional revenues between now and whenever that need to happen. 2, that they would not continue to make additional efficiencies or reductions. And so certainly, it doesn't necessarily fill the structural deficit per se, but to just say that the referendum would be the only other option, I don't think is inaccurate, would be an accurate thing to assume.
Well, my understanding of what we're doing here is we're trying to avoid a referendum. So if what we're doing, and if we do it, you know, the nuclear option basically, and it still doesn't keep us going to a referendum, what are we doing?
I don't think that's what I heard, though. Dr. Gibson, is that what you said? That this would still require additional referendum funding?
What I said from the validation is just option 1 alone would
Right.
not be enough, but option 2, based upon the validation input that I received and also the documents, that it would forestall a referendum for at least 5 years. And then what would happen during those 5 years, we don't know.
Right.
Which is Joe's comment.
Right.
Because even this year, there were changes that helped you. We don't know those for 5 years, but we couldn't fairly say it would forestall it longer than 5 years
Right.
based upon the financial due diligence.
But our cost structure, our debt structure drops in 5 years. So we have 5 years and then it starts to drop down. So theoretically, but again, there's a lot of variables that continue to move and membership is a critical one to
I'm
that.
just thinking that that's a big criticism that people have. They don't want to see another referendum, or they don't want to see any referendum, so that
Yeah, I
was
don't
the
know if
reason
that's
for my
it. I mean,
question.
keep in mind that the referendum didn't pass, and I know we're hearing people say the fact that it didn't pass was because it wasn't organized, but it wasn't organized on the other side either. So people that didn't want referendum are gonna get organized as well. So I'm just saying, there's no good answer here.
Sure. Okay, my last question is, this exercise is attempting to serve a constituency, which are people who don't want higher taxes through a referendum, that is not appearing at these meetings. Where are these mythical people demanding what this exercise is intended to address? Where is the pressure coming from? The survey that is mentioned in the assumptions is that 37%, you know, what is the, Dr. Gibson, your initial assumption? There we go. 37.8% of all respondents definitely or probably supported the consolidation of elementary schools. So that's let's give them 38% of our constituency supported it. Okay, so then option 2 is what? How many people? Oh, here we go. Page 5. Okay, that's for option 1. Is it page 7? So it's the same percentage. Is that correct? But do we have a number for support or non-support of consolidation of high schools and middle schools?
Yeah, we'll have to get back. I don't remember if that was a question we asked. I believe it was a question we asked. We'll have to see what the numbers were. Yeah, because I do see that the number there says this.
So I guess my question to the board, and I would like to hear it being addressed perhaps at the September 23rd meeting, is who are we serving through this exercise? Who are we paying attention to? Does the community want it, or do we think the community wants it? And if we're going through all of this, and if we're expending money and time and everything else, and a lot of people's time out here, what are we doing this for? Is there a justification for this exercise to even be taking place? And if it's not, we need to stop and we need to turn around and we need to start paying more attention to the other question that didn't have enough time to get answered properly. And that is, how much money do we need through an operating referendum? And what do we need to communicate to people to get that referendum passed? We need to start thinking in that term as well, because if we don't start thinking about it, we're going to have the same 70 days if we don't start until January, and it will probably fail again. And I don't want to go through all that again. And I would like your time spent furthering our district, not pinching pennies. So for pinching pennies for no good reason, I think that's a misuse of your time, your energy, and our money. So I'd like some answers to that at the 23rd meeting, if that's possible. Thank you.
Hi, Brenda Letelier, 17,000 West Sundown Drive. The first thing I'd like to point out that many of us in this room have read the IFF study that said West's maximum was 1,200 kids. It fits 10 through 12 of our current enrollment. I want to know how magically 300 plus kids magically fit in this building. I think that's a question we're all asking. That's number one. Number two is I, as well as a lot of these other parents and my children, would like transparency on where you think these costs are coming from. I personally would like to see a list of the costs that you think you will save beyond staff and closing of a building and consolidation. I want to see line item by line item what we think we're going to save. And I want to see line item by line item what costs you think you've identified. Because us parents and the upperclassmen at Eisenhower came up with at least 50 things we don't think you even have a finger on. Do you guys know how much a band uniform costs? Do you have any idea? I do. We do. $385 a piece. And Eisenhower's and West's are both fairly new. Eisenhower alone spent $38,000 on uniforms recently. So when you put Ike and West together into one band, that's a $75,000 expense to make us one school. That's just one example. You mentioned gym lockers. Great. The school holds 1,200 kids. Do you have 1,533 lockers? Does anyone know? Those are the kinds of things that we've come up with that you guys need to listen to, and we need to see your list of what you think you've identified, and you need to see our list of what we think we've identified, because I know they don't jive. I'm sure they don't jive. So before we go crazy and do crazy things, let's really look at the true costs, because I don't think either side, if you want to look at it that way, has a number, a real number. I don't think we've examined this anywhere near far enough. Okay? Thank you.
I'll just quickly piggyback on what she just said, because I wanted Scott to know that I think I am the mythical person who demanded the study that he was looking for, because you heard me say it. I was looking to, if you want to fully understand if this was a viable option, I had asked you and begged you in previous meetings to delineate not just the annual savings, and very important, thanks for whoever pointed out, how much is the annual savings versus the one-time savings, big difference in how it applies to the structural deficit. But I was begging you to say, if you really want to know if this is a viable option, you need to delineate the actual costs of closing 3 schools, all of the different costs. That has not yet been done. And I understand that was not Dr. Gibson's mission here. It was only to validate whatever numbers had been presented back in April. I get it. But that work has not been done. Maybe it doesn't have to be done. He made that point too. If this information is enough to rule out this option, great. Then let's not spend any more brain power and time and energy and money studying it further and getting down to every nickel and every dime and every band uniform. Great. If it's enough to convince everybody, a lot of us are already convinced, but however much convincing we need to rule it out, great. But meanwhile, I would suggest you might want to repair the document before the presentation to the Budget Task Force and before the next presentation on the 23rd, clean up the errors in it, and then see where the discussion goes from there. But I do hope that maybe this is enough to rule out the option. If it's not, then please let's study the costs further because the costs are numerous and they are not identified to any degree in this document. Thanks.
Scott Luzier, resident of New Berlin, fairly recent. I would say that there are a lot of soft costs that are not fully understood and even identified in agreement with the last group. Just even the staff, just to orchestrate a move of or closing of one school, let alone all of the schools and restructuring them all, just from your time alone to all the other staff and requirements that it would take to do that is just unbelievable and not identified at all in this study. As far as the referendum, I think that is still the #1 way to achieve this, and I would say that the reason that it did not pass is that there's a shortcoming of understanding about only around 5 years. The community at large wants to understand what's happening beyond 5 years, beyond 10 years, and understand that there is more than just closing a school. So that's how they perceive what's going on if they're not here and understanding what's going on. So you need to think beyond the 5-year plan. It needs to be a 10-year and a 15-year plan for this school district. And closing the schools or restructuring them is a short-term solution from my perspective.
The presentation that we were given wouldn't pass Economics 101. We'll just take one minor point, I think it's a critical one, and it has to do with capacity. There are 2 different kinds of capacities. There's physical capacity and there's working capacity. The physical capacity is how many you can squeeze into a classroom and count them all. Working capacity is the maximum number of students you can have in the building for it to function properly. You could take Elmwood, for example. The capacity is around 605, or plus or minus. That's what the original study said. You can't put in 700 people. How do you feed them? There's not enough cafeteria space to feed that many people unless you start feeding them when they get there. Secondly, you have drainage issues. You have, which have, I'll call it legal requirements, and you have very limited capacity as to where you can have holding ponds. The third aspect is parking. There's a legal relationship between the number of students in the building and the number of parking spaces. I'm on the Tax Appeals Board. We deal with that not frequently. So I'm saying is the original study is valid with respect to capacity. Option 1 falls off the table because Elmwood, as an example, doesn't have the capacity. Option 2 falls off the table because West doesn't have the capacity. Working capacity is what makes all the difference, and unless you focus on that, you're just throwing numbers around.
Again, first meeting, so I'm not entirely sure how relevant it is, but I just was wondering, as far as figuring out feasibility data, I know that districts love data. My mom used to be a school board member, and what appears from this data to be one of the largest in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, when I was a kid. Have they looked at the crime and drug use that occurs after a district has closed a middle school or high school? Have you guys looked into the crime rate and drug use that occurred after a district closed a middle school and high school for feasibility data? Might be something to consider. Another thing would be, have we looked into the area of Orchard Lane and the number of baby boomers probably leaving within the next 5 years, opening up starter homes to families, not childless millennials? That would be something also to consider. And then finally, nope, I lied, 2 more things. I was just curious if you guys had looked into business sponsorship for creating the debt. I know that Kenosha Indian Trails, which is the largest high school, was created on business sponsorship, and then was then adapted within 10 years as a regular high school to the city. So that might be another option to look into. Finally, have any of you been in a classroom of 35 students. My junior year of high school at Kenosha Bradford, which is also up there on that list, actually just above what New Berlin would be projected at. My French class was 35 students. We did not have enough desks for kids to sit in. That was probably when my ability to learn French suffered. I tried in my senior year, and I tried in college, and I finally just gave up on having that dual language in my ability. So that's something to consider. And then now you guys are considering 33 and 35 in Ronald Reagan in elementary school. Are you going to have a teacher's assistant in those classrooms? I believe at 30 is the cutoff where you're supposed to have 2 students. I know in other districts, maybe not this one. Again, I'm new. I'm from Racine, which also is on one of those top 10s and is probably in the bottom 10% ranking for school districts in Wisconsin. Is that where you want to head? So just things to consider. And I'm more than happy to share any insight you would like in being on a big, in those districts with those large numbers. I was in a class of, I think, I graduated with 410 students, and I can tell you where things were lacking. But just things to consider. Thank you.
I just want to piggyback off a number of things that were said. First of all, and you may not have considered this, I spent the first part of my professional career in sales and business development. So that means if you hire a contractor, and I was in construction, specifically construction for schools and churches and hospitals, if you ask a contractor to come in and give you a bid or give you an estimate of how many kids they can fit into a space, they want that business. They know that if they're one of the first people on site when you are asking those first set of questions, they stand a better chance of getting that business down the road. So they are incentivized to answer that question favorably. So that's just one thing. Secondly, what she said about larger schools. When my husband and I were researching schools in the area, sorry for the shaky voice because I don't like public speaking. Coming from sales is really funny, but at any rate, which is why I don't do it anymore. When we were researching schools in the area, okay, we knew we couldn't afford a private school, but we knew we wanted the best possible public school that we could find. And we thought we knew the district that we wanted to live in. We thought we had an idea of which ones would be acceptable to us. But the more we started digging and asking questions and personal questions of people who are more familiar with parents in those districts or who know more or live closer, the more he found out that the larger the school, the more we heard about drug use. Because these are wealthy schools with parents who both work, and they have larger student bodies that can influence their behavior. And so the school districts that we thought we wanted, the more we dug, the more we found out, no, we don't want that. We want a smaller school where the sphere of influence from peers isn't as tough, the peer pressure isn't as high, it's a different environment for kids, especially if you're a teenager. So we researched for probably over a year before deciding that, you know what, those larger schools, they're off the list now. We are not interested. So just keep that in mind as well, please. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna we're approaching our half hour. If you guys, we don't want to keep Dr. Gibson here too late either. A lot of these are comments for the board, so feel free to talk to us after the meeting or come and privilege of the floor. But we have 5 more minutes that I said we would do a half an hour. So if you have specific questions, please come on up. But we will be cutting it off at 9 o'clock.
One of the questions I have, they're all regarding class sizes currently. On section 3, it says projected 2019-2020. Is this reworking the enrollment? And I wonder if so, how in Reagan it's estimated that, I think it went for 4th through 6th grades, the average class size is 24 when it's currently 30. And I know you mentioned because you're moving some kids, so you would have additional Elmwood kids or Orchard Lane kids in the building, and you're going to 5 sections. I would like to see the breakout, and when you're looking at moving, are you looking at how many are in per grade? As well as I would like to see the math drawn out on all of these, because once again, questioning the transparency behind numbers, as well as someone else has mentioned, I've heard Susan say, probably just because she was the appropriate person, that enrollment is expected to decline. I would like to know how that is gathered, because I know I probably have one of the neighborhoods where it's a lot of homes built in 1970s, where many of us younger families have bought from original owners, and the amount of people moving out versus kids that are not in school currently with all these infants and 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds is insane. And how questioning with the new development in Elmwood, I believe it was mentioned in a past meeting that the increased enrollment was expected to be about 3 students. That doesn't make sense.
So just a point of clarification, and so if I said it's going to decline, that's not what I meant. It has been declining for the past decade, and it's going to flatten out, right? We don't know what's going to happen if it goes up a little bit, but is not projected to return back to what we had in the previous years.
And what is that, the source of that information?
Joe, I don't know if you can cite the exact source.
Yeah, so we've done enrollment, basically a standard enrollment report. We did an ultimate enrollment back in, I'm trying to think, back when the city, a 10-year future land use plan was developed. When that was determined, and again, I'm thinking it was about 10 years ago, that was commissioned and actually completed. Section 35 was factored in, and so on, but there is no updated 10-year plan at this point. We've actually been in touch with the city of New Berlin to determine, what is future land use projected to be. That's still a work in progress. They need to also determine what the census is going to be, and it's also going to update demographics in the city. Based on your question specifically about, how can we determine what future enrollment is with all this turnover? We've talked to the assessor, we've talked to Scott Kloss, we've talked to the city planning committee and commission, people that lead from the city, and that is a very difficult question to answer.
Because I think that's definitely something that should be noted, and how we've mentioned Orchard Lane may be closed for 5 years. Elmwood's at capacity. Yes, Reagan's going to absorb so much, but we have so many more incoming students.
Thank you.
Hi. On page 5, when we're talking about the option of just consolidating the elementary schools, this looks like it's just the projected 1920 school year. I would suggest that you also look at the projections for 2022 through 2023. Based on Mr. Dixon's presentation from spring of 2018, he said there was expected to be an extra 200 elementary school children in just a few years. And already looking at these numbers, and even if we don't use the IFF capacity, if we go to what Mr. Dixon came up with last year, using his own capacity calculations, even this example on page 5, you're at 98% capacity for Elmwood already. Ronald Reagan would be 97% capacity, not including the early elementary, the K3, K4. So I think if you look at it with 3 to 4 years, using Mr. Dixon's numbers, I'm not making up anything, use your own numbers, look at this, and to me, it's not even a consideration, because I don't understand how you can fit all the children in the schools if you close Orchard Lane. And then the other thing is for West, I do have the capacity numbers that were quoted here. The IFF capacity for West, the study was 1,404. Last spring, when they redid the numbers, a low was 1,400 and the high was 1,550. So I'm having a huge problem understanding how in that little amount of time, the numbers could have changed from 1,400 to 2,200. And to me, all this goes back to the very first thing I talked about when I heard about consolidation is capacity. How are you going to fit the kids in the schools that we have? And to me, to close a school and then talk about adding on to another school, taking away from the northeast part of the town, where the affordable housing is, really upsets me. And I know it's personal, it's my school. It's my children's school. But please go back to the capacity numbers like I asked from the very beginning. Look at these, look at the own numbers you've presented, and stop changing the numbers. And then the final thing I have to ask is, has anyone talked to the fire marshal about any of this?
So Joe, just to that point.
Again, getting back to safety.
Excuse me. Joe, to that point, did you say in November we're going to go over capacity? Is that what you said at a future
The
meeting?
enrollment updates will be completed by that point.
Can we look at capacity at that point as well?
We can bring more detail based on the numbers we've provided, certainly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, we'll have Scott wrap it up again.
So, thanks for being a firing squad for us. I learned a lot, but thank you. I know that probably wasn't easy. One question on page 4 is they don't have regular classrooms or anything sizes around the high school. And just a real life example, when I was fresh out of college, I moved to Illinois to teach, and I was a Phi Ed teacher, and Illinois passed a law that they had to have Phi Ed every single day, but they didn't think that they should probably double the teachers in the gyms because they're doubling the amount of times that Phi Ed is needed. So what happened was, I thought it was really cool. At first there was seven of us brand new out of college. We became really good friends, but then I realized there was only 8 Phi Ed teachers in that district, and 7 of them left in 1 year. And what happened was 4 of us, there was 4 classes in a double gym, probably the size of Ike, and we each had classrooms of 40 to 45, up to 50, and basically the principal said, close the door, I don't want anyone to get hurt, and you'll be successful. And that's just a real life example of something that sounds good on paper or in theory, and then it isn't thought about in the real world. So classroom sizes are very, very important to me, and I'd just like to see that carry over to what it looks like in the high school. And then if $2,319,752 would prevent a referendum, I would be willing to bet that if the referendum was for $2,319,752 over the next 5 years, it would have passed. And that would have been $41.29 a person based on those numbers. That's the kind of specific detail I think would be very much appreciated. Even if it's to the dollar, like I would love to see something like that.
So again, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you, Dr. Gibson. We will have him return on September 23rd. So any questions that you have in between there, feel free to either email the board or come back on the 23rd, and we'll make sure that we get those questions answered. Our next meeting is on September 9th, which is Monday, and then we have another meeting on September 23rd. The Community Budget Task Force will meet here in the New Berlin West Commons on September 10th and September 16th. And our last item on the agenda is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a motion by Ms. Manley, a second by Ms. Schultz to adjourn. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Hands down, all opposed. Motion passes. The meeting is adjourned.